The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the penthouse, crystal fragments catching the city lights like fallen stars. Damian Cross stood frozen at his floor-to-ceiling windows, the phone call that had just ended still echoing. In his mind, the board voted. Unanimous decision. Either you marry within 3 months, or we remove you as CEO. 20 years of building Cross Industries from nothing. 20 years of sacrificing everything for the company that bore his name. And now, they wanted to strip it away because he was unmarried at 34. Mr. Cross? Through the silence. His assistant stepped carefully around the broken glass, extending a tablet. I have the files you requested. Damian turned from the window, his jaw tight. Show me. The screen displayed surveillance footage from the flower shop across the street. For months, he'd found himself watching the auburn-haired woman who tended to wilting roses like they were precious children. Celia Romano, 26, struggling to keep her grandmother's shop alive while caring for her younger brother. She's perfect, Vincent said quietly. Authentic, beautiful, and desperate enough to say yes. Damian's stomach clenched at the cold calculation in those words, but desperation made monsters of them all. The contract? 3 months? $1 million plus all debts cleared? Clean divorce at the end? The plan was flawless on paper. A fake marriage to satisfy the board's archaic demands, then freedom for them both. What could go wrong with a simple business transaction? Everything, as it turned out. Damian watched the tablet screen as Celia emerged from her shop, her sundress catching in the evening breeze. She paused to deadhead a row of petunias, her touch gentle despite the calluses. On her fingers, there was something luminous about her, something that made his chest tighten in ways that had nothing to do with business. Send Vincent to make the offer, he said, hating himself even as the words left his mouth. But I want to meet her first. If she agrees, I want to look her in the eye before we both sign our lives away. Vincent nodded and left, leaving Damian alone with his reflection in the darkened windows. Somewhere across the street, Celia Romano was closing up her failing flower shop, unaware that her entire world was about to change. He told himself it was just business. It's a temporary arrangement that would save them both. But as he watched her lock the shop door and disappear into the gathering dusk, Damian Cross couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Or perhaps, against all logic and reason, the best decision he'd ever made. The city sparkled below him like a galaxy of possibilities, each light a reminder of how much he stood to lose. In 3 days, he would meet Celia Romano face to face. In 1 week, if all went according to plan, she would be his wife. The thought should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. Wind howling around him, unsure whether the next step would be salvation or his complete undoing. Vincent's footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, moving toward the elevator that would carry him across the street to make an offer that would change everything. Damian pressed his palm against the cool glass of the window and watched the flower shop's lights flicker off one by one. Soon, there would be no turning back. Celia's hands trembled as she stepped out of the elevator, into what could only be described as a temple to wealth and power. The penthouse office stretched before her like something from a fevered dream. All dark mahogany and buttery leather, with windows that offered the city like a gift spread across black velvet. Vincent had delivered his impossible Proposition 12 hours ago. 12 hours of pacing, arguing with Tommy, and staring at numbers that could solve every problem in her life. $1 million. Her shop saved. Tommy's art school tuition paid in full, all for 3 months of pretending to be married to a man she'd never met. Miss Romano? The voice that spoke her name was deep, textured like aged whiskey, and it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Damian Cross stood silhouetted against the wall of windows, and every photograph she'd ever seen of him had failed to capture the raw magnetism that seemed to radiate from his very presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. But it was his eyes that made her knees weak. Storm gray and intense, they held a weight that spoke of burdens carried alone for too long. "Mr. Cross?" She was proud that her voice remained steady. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." He moved toward her with fluid grace, each step measured and predatory. I had to meet the woman brave enough to consider this madness. Brave or desperate. The words slipped out before she could stop them. His lips curved in what might have been a smile. In my experience, they're often the same thing. He gestured to the sitting area, and she settled into a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Up close, she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "Why me?" she asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. Damian leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin feel electric. "Because you're real, Celia. In a world full of people who would sell their souls for a mention in the society pages, you're fighting to save a flower shop that most people would consider a lost cause." "It's not lost," she said fiercely. "It just needs time. Time you don't have." The brutal honesty in his voice made her flinch, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "What exactly would you expect from me?" "Public appearances. Smile for the cameras. Play the devoted wife when necessary." His voice was matter of fact, but she caught something else underneath. Loneliness. In private, we'd live separate lives, no expectations beyond what's written in the contract, and after 3 months, a quiet divorce. You keep everything promised in the contract, and we both get what we need. Celia stared out at the glittering city below, her mind racing. It was insane, reckless, potentially devastating. It was also her only chance at saving everything she held dear. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them." "Tommy gets his art school tuition. Full ride, no questions asked." She took a breath. "And I want guaranteed protection for the shop. Not just clearing current debts, but permanent protection against future foreclosure." "Done. I won't change who I am. Designer clothes for events." "Fine, but I'm not becoming some plastic society wife. I wouldn't want you to." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She studied his face, looking for deception, manipulation, the casual cruelty she expected from someone with his power. Instead, she saw exhaustion, determination, and something that looked almost vulnerable. "Why aren't you married already?" she asked. "Someone like you must have options." His expression darkened. "Everyone in my world wants something from me. Money, status, connections. You're the first person I've met in years who didn't even know who I was when Vincent walked into your shop." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She had expected arrogance, entitlement. Instead, she heard an echo of her own loneliness, her own weariness, with a world that seemed designed to crush dreams. "All right, Mr. Cross." She stood, extending her hand. "You have yourself a deal." When their palms met, electricity shot through her like lightning. From the way his eyes widened slightly, she suspected he felt it too. The handshake lingered a moment longer than necessary, their gazes locked, and Celia felt something shift. In the air between them, she left that gleaming tower, contract signed and future sealed. Celia Romano had no idea that she'd just agreed to much more than a fake marriage. She'd agreed to a dance with destiny itself, one that would test everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the price of dreams. The charity gala was only 3 days away, and her transformation from small-town florist to billionaire's bride was about to begin. But as she walked through the quiet streets toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part of this arrangement wouldn't be fooling the world. It would be trying not to fool herself into believing it could be real. The woman staring back from the mirror was a stranger. In just 3 days, an army of stylists, designers, and etiquette coaches had transformed Celia from a simple flower shop owner into someone who belonged on magazine covers. The emerald silk gown hugged her curves like liquid starlight, and the diamond necklace at her throat caught every flicker of light. "You look absolutely stunning," breathed Sophia Chen, the personal stylist Damian had hired. "Mr. Cross won't be able to take his eyes off you." Celia touched the necklace nervously. "It feels like I'm wearing someone else's life." "Tonight you are," Sophia said gently. "But remember, underneath all this glamour, you're still you. Hey, that's what makes you perfect for this role." The charity gala was being held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a glittering palace that made Celia feel like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. As their limousine pulled up to the red carpet, she saw the wall of photographers waiting like hungry wolves. "Ready?" Damian's voice was low beside her, and she turned to find him devastating in his black tuxedo. The formal wear emphasized the sharp planes of his face, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he commanded attention without saying a word. "As ready as someone can be for their debut as a fake wife," she murmured. His hand found hers, warm and reassuring. "Just follow my lead and remember we're supposed to be madly in love." The car door opened, and the world exploded into camera flashes and shouted questions. Damian emerged first, then turned to help her out with the kind of old-world gallantry that made her knees weak. His arm slipped around her waist, possessive and protective, and she found herself leaning into his solid warmth. "Mrs. Cross, how does it feel to be married to New York's most eligible bachelor? When's the honeymoon? How long have you been together?" Damian's smile was perfection itself as he guided her through the gauntlet. But Celia could feel the tension in his body, see the calculation behind his easy charm. This was a performance, she reminded herself. Nothing more. The ballroom was a fantasy of crystal chandeliers and gold leaf, filled with Manhattan's elite in their designer armor. Conversations paused as they entered, all eyes tracking their movement across the marble floor. "You're doing beautifully," Damian murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Half the room is already in love with you. The other half, wondering how I got so lucky." The compliment, delivered with such quiet conviction, made her heart stumble. "This is just business," she told herself firmly. "Don't read more into it than exists." But as the evening progressed, the line between performance and reality began to blur. Damian's hand never left her back as he introduced her to board members and business partners. When she laughed at something he said, his eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. When she stumbled slightly in her heels, he caught her with reflexes that spoke of someone who'd been watching her carefully all night. "You two are absolutely radiant together," gushed Margaret Wellington, steel-haired socialite who controlled half the charity boards in the city. "How did you meet?" Celia felt panic flutter in her chest, but Damian's thumb traced soothing circles on her back. "I couldn't resist her flower shop," he said smoothly. "She has this way of making everything beautiful, even the most hopeless cases. Like billionaire workaholics." Celia found herself teasing, the words coming more naturally than they should have. "Especially billionaire workaholics." His smile was soft, private, meant just for her, and for a moment she forgot they had an audience. The spell broke when Richard Blackwood, the board member who'd orchestrated Damian's marriage ultimatum, approached with predatory satisfaction. "Damian, and the lovely Mrs. Cross. How refreshing to see you so settled." "Richard," Damian's voice, "could have frozen hell, enjoying the evening immensely. Though I have to admit, this marriage came as quite a surprise. So sudden, so private. One might almost think it was arranged for convenience rather than love." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Celia felt Damian's muscles coil with tension, saw the dangerous glitter in his storm-gray eyes. In that moment, she realized how much this meant to him, how much he stood to lose if their deception was discovered. Without thinking, she stepped closer to her fake husband, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. "Sometimes love doesn't follow a convenient timeline, Mr. Blackwood. When you know, you know." She turned her face up to Damian's, letting all the longing she'd been carefully suppressing show in her eyes. "Isn't that right, darling?" For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Damian's hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Exactly right," he murmured, and bent to kiss her. It was supposed to be for show, a performance to convince their doubters. But the moment his lips touched hers, everything else fell away. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as she melted against him. She could taste champagne on his lips, feel the rapid beat of his heart under her palm, smell the intoxicating blend of his cologne and something uniquely him. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom had gone silent around them. even Richard. Blackwood looked convinced, his earlier suspicion replaced by grudging acceptance. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose that settles that." As the evening wound down and they made their way back to the limousine, Celia's mind was spinning. That kiss had changed everything, crossing a line they'd carefully drawn between business and pleasure. The electricity between them was undeniable. Now, crackling in the confined space of the car, "You were incredible tonight," Damian said softly. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner in crime." Partner in crime. The words stung more than they should have, reminding her that this was all just an elaborate deception. She was playing a role, nothing more. "Just earning my fee," she said lightly, but even she could hear the hurt in her voice. Damian's expression darkened, and he reached for her hand. "Celia, about what happened in there. That kiss was perfect." "For the cameras," she interrupted, pulling her hand away. "Very convincing. The board will never doubt us now." And she turned to stare out the window, at the city lights blurring past, fighting the urge to cry. It had been foolish to think, even for a moment, that any of it was real. She was Cinderella at midnight, and the spell was already beginning to fade. But if that were true, why did Damian look like she'd just slapped him? And why did her lips still burn from a kiss that was supposed to mean nothing at all? 3 weeks into their fake marriage, Celia was drowning, not in debt this time, but in something far more dangerous. The stolen glances across the breakfast table in Damian's penthouse, the way his fingers lingered when he helped her with her coat, the quiet conversations that stretched late into the night, revealing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else. She'd moved into the guest bedroom of his penthouse for appearances, but the walls between them felt thinner each day. Every shared meal, every public appearance where he looked at her like she hung the moon, every private moment when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the lonely man behind the billionaire facade. "You're falling for him," Tommy said bluntly during one of their coffee dates. Her brother had thrived in art school, his talent finally given the resources it deserved, but his eyes held worry when he looked at her. "Don't be ridiculous." Celia stirred her latte with unnecessary violence. "It's a business arrangement. Nothing more." "Tell that to your face. You light up like a Christmas tree every time his name is mentioned." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Damian. "Board meeting ran late. Dinner without me tonight. Rain check." The disappointment that crashed through her was proof enough of Tommy's words. She was in love with her fake husband, and it was going to destroy her. That evening, she found herself in Damian's home office, drawn by the soft glow of his desk lamp. He sat hunched over financial reports, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened around his neck. He looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and heartbreakingly human. "You shouldn't work so late," she said softly from the doorway. He looked up, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart ache, says the woman who was watering plants. "At midnight last week. That's different. Plants need consistent care. So do workaholics, apparently." He gestured to the couch across from his desk. "Keep me company." "I could use the distraction." She settled onto the leather sofa, tucking her feet beneath her. This had become their routine, these quiet evenings. Conversations that felt more intimate than any physical touch. Tonight, though, something was different. There was tension in his shoulders, shadows in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "What's wrong?" she asked. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his pen and looked at her with raw honesty that stole her breath. "I got a call from my private investigator today. He's been digging into Richard Blackwood's background, trying to understand why he pushed so hard for this marriage ultimatum." Celia's stomach dropped. "What did he find?" "Blackwood's been making moves to oust me for months. The marriage demand wasn't about stability. He expected me to refuse or to marry someone he could manipulate, someone who would help him gain control of the company. But I'm not that person, no." His eyes were fierce, protective. "You're not?" "Which means he's going to come after you next." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Celia felt the careful world they'd built together beginning to crumble. "Maybe I should go," she whispered. "If I'm putting you in danger, no." The word was sharp, Final. We have a contract. A deal. I won't let him drive you away. Is that what this is about? Is the contract? The question escaped before she could stop it, laden with all the longing and confusion she'd been fighting for. Weeks. Damian went very still, his eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. Celia, her phone rang, shrill and insistent. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID made her blood freeze. Richard Blackwood. She answered with trembling fingers. Hello? Mrs. Cross. How lovely to finally speak with you directly. Damian was on his feet instantly, his face murderous. She put the call on speaker with shaking hands. What do you want, Richard? She asked. To make you an offer? $5 million to end this charade and walk away. Surely a girl from your background understands the value of that kind of money. This isn't a charade, she said firmly, even as her heart was breaking. I love my husband. Blackwood's laugh was cold as winter rain.
Please.
We both know this. Marriage is as fake as Damian's concern for anyone but himself. He's using you, my dear. The moment you're no longer useful, he'll discard you like yesterday's newspaper. That's enough, Damian snarled, taking the phone. Stay away from my wife, Richard. I won't warn you again. He ended the call and turned to find Celia staring at him with eyes full of tears. Is he right? She whispered. Am I just useful to you? The question hit him like a physical blow. How can you even ask that? Because you've never said otherwise. The words exploded out of her, weeks of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. We have a contract, Damian. A business arrangement. When it ends in 6 weeks, what then? Do I go back to my little flower shop and pretend none of this happened? Do we pass each other on the street like strangers? I don't know, he said honestly, and the admission shattered something inside her chest. I can't do this anymore. She was crying now, ugly tears that ruined her makeup and left her feeling raw and exposed. I can't pretend to be your wife while dying a little more each day, because I'm falling in love with a man who sees me as a convenient solution to his problems, Celia. Please no. She backed toward the door, desperate to escape before she completely fell apart. I'll finish out the contract because my word means something. But after that, we're done. Really done. She fled to her room, locking the door behind her, and sank onto the bed as sobs racked her body. Through the thin walls, she could hear Damian pacing, muttering to himself in Italian, the sound of something heavy hitting the wall. She'd known this would happen, had known from the moment she signed that contract that she was walking into heartbreak. But knowing and experiencing were two very different things. As the city sparkled below her window, Celia Romano began planning. Her exit from a life that had never really been hers to begin with. 6 weeks left on their contract. 6 weeks to guard her heart and remember that fairy tales only existed in storybooks. But in the hallway outside her door, Damian Cross was realizing that he'd just lost the only real thing in his life. For the first time since building his empire, he wasn't sure any amount of money or power could fix what he'd broken. The flower shop was exactly as Celia had left it 6 weeks ago, but she felt like a different person walking through its familiar doors. As the contract was fulfilled, the marriage legally dissolved, and her bank account held more money than she'd ever dreamed of seeing, she should have been happy. Instead, she felt hollow. Tommy looked up from where he was arranging a display of sunflowers, his face creased with worry. How did it go? It's done. She hung up her coat with mechanical precision. Damian signed the papers this morning. In the eyes of the law, we were never really married at all. It was a lie. They'd had a quiet courthouse ceremony for legal purposes, witnessed only by Vincent and a judge who'd been paid handsomely for his discretion. But those 10 minutes had felt more real than any of their public appearances. Celia, I don't want to talk about it. She moved to her beloved roses, grateful for the familiar ritual of checking soil moisture and trimming dead blooms. School, amazing, thanks to you. But I'm worried about my sister who looks like she hasn't slept in days. Brief, restless stretches, punctuated by dreams of storm-gray eyes and the phantom sensation of strong arms around her. But she couldn't tell Tommy that without falling apart completely. Above the door chimed, and she looked up expecting a customer. Instead, Vincent stood in the doorway, his usually perfect composure slightly rumpled. "Miss Romano, may I speak with you privately?" Tommy raised an eyebrow, but retreated to the back room without comment. Celia faced Damian's assistant with what she hoped was professional calm. "If this is about the remaining paperwork, I already signed everything. It's not about paperwork." Vincent's voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "It's about my employer, who's been making decisions that would concern anyone who cares about him." Despite herself, alarm flickered through her. What kind of decisions? He's selling Cross Industries. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Would he do that? Because without you, he says it doesn't matter anymore? The board got what they wanted. A stable, married CEO. Except he's not married anymore, and apparently he's decided he doesn't want to be CEO either. Vincent stepped closer, his expression urgent. He's giving up everything he built because he thinks he destroyed the only thing that mattered. "Doesn't love me," Celia whispered, the words tearing at her throat. "It was just a contract, business arrangement." "Miss Romano, I've worked for Damian Cross for 8 years. I've seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, fire entire departments without hesitation, make decisions that affected thousands of lives with perfect cold logic. In all that time, I've never seen him fall apart the way he did. After you left," she shook her head, unable to process what he was telling her. "He didn't try to stop me from leaving, because he thought you deserved better than a man who'd used you to solve his problems. Because he was convinced that any feelings you had were just part of the performance." Vincent pulled out his phone, showing her a video that made her heart stop. It was security footage from the penthouse, time-stamped the night she'd left. Damian stood at the windows overlooking her flower shop, his hand pressed against the glass, his shoulders shaking with what could only be sobs. "He watches your shop every night," Vincent said quietly. "Stands at those windows for hours, like he's trying to will you to look up and see him. He's in love with you, Miss Romano. It's completely, devastatingly in love. And he's convinced he's lost you forever." Tears spilled down her cheeks as the truth crashed over her. All those moments she'd thought were performance had been real. At the tender touches, the protective glances, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. It had all been real. Where is he now? The penthouse. Staring out at your shop as usual. She was running before the words finished leaving his mouth, Tommy's startled shout following her out the door. The familiar streets blurred past as she sprinted toward the glass tower that had once felt like a fairy tale, her heart pounding with desperate hope. The elevator seemed to take forever, each floor crawling by while she fought to catch her breath. When the doors finally opened to the penthouse, she found Damian exactly where Vincent had said he'd be. Standing at the windows, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the city lights, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "Vincent, I told you I didn't want to be disturbed," he said without turning around. "It's not Vincent." He spun toward her voice, his face cycling through shock, hope, and desperate longing before settling on careful neutrality. "Celia, what are you doing here?" She took a step closer, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble that spoke. Of days without proper sleep, the wrinkled shirt that suggested he'd been wearing it too long. "Vincent told me you're selling the company." "Vincent talks too much." His voice was hoarse, wrecked, but yes, I'm selling. "Why?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I spent 20 years building something I thought mattered, only to discover that none of it means anything without the right person to share it with. And who would that be?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd never said. All the feelings they'd kept carefully hidden behind. The safety of their contract? "You," he said simply. "It was always you, Celia. From the moment I saw you tending to those flowers like they were made of gold, I knew you were different, special. And I was so convinced that someone like you could never really love someone like me that I nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." She was crying again, but these were different tears. Healing tears. "You idiotic, wonderful man. Did it never occur to you that maybe I was falling in love with you too?" His face transformed with wonder, as if she'd just told him the sun had decided to rise in the west. "Were you really?" Instead of answering with words, she closed the distance between them and kissed him with everything she had. All the longing she'd suppressed, all the love she'd tried to deny. All the dreams she'd thought were impossible poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Not because of a contract or a business arrangement or any practical reason. I love your laugh, and the way you hum while you work, and how you make me want to be worthy of the way you see the world. I love that you chose to fight for a failing flower shop because it meant something to someone you loved. I love that you agreed to marry a stranger to save your brother's dreams. I love every stubborn, brave, beautiful thing about you. I love you too," she said through her tears. "I love that you built an empire from nothing but never lost your humanity. Love. That you were willing to give it all up rather than live without love. I love that you see me as someone worth fighting for." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Marry me again. For real this time, not for the board or the company or anyone else. It's because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Are you proposing with a prenup and a business plan?" "I'm proposing with nothing but my heart and a promise to love you for the rest of my life. The company, the money, all of it comes second to you. It always will." She smiled through her tears, finally understanding what it felt like to be truly seen, truly cherished. Yes. Yes to all of it. Yes, forever. As he spun her around the penthouse that had once felt like a gilded cage, but now felt like home, Celia Romano knew that some fairy tales were worth the wait. Some love stories began with contracts and ended with promises that no amount of money could buy. Outside the windows, the city sparkled like a galaxy of possibilities. Across the street, the flower shop glowed with warm yellow light. Tomorrow, she would tend to her roses and plan a real wedding to the man who'd shown her that sometimes the most beautiful blooms grew from the most unlikely soil. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In the arms of the man who loved her not for what she could give him, but for who she was. The girl who'd saved wilting flowers and found herself saved in return. Do you like this video? If the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.